All right, welcome back. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding the backend for Gem Wars. We're going to do it in Entity Framework. I currently have the identity server and the web API set up, so we should be good to go to just start scaffolding our entities. If I show where the game is at currently, let me check one thing here, which is that I changed in the backend now to do this as a task.run, and we're asynchronous calling get token asynchronous. And the other thing that I want to do is I want to make another request here. And we want to do var. Let's do this as a using var client. So that way we can do it again. And this one, we're going to pass in nothing. And it's just going to be a get. So it's a await client dot get asynchronous from my request URI, which is this one. And in this, I want to say client dot, do you have authorization or headers? And we're going to add, so I should have an authorization here. So we'll just do this as a add. And I want to say that this is my authorization. And I want to say the value is going to be my token up here. And this is just for testing. And now we want to deserialize this as a request object. Token DTO. JSON utility.dc from JSON. And I want to do this for my token DTO. And then that should be a little better. From token DTO of my data. And that's going to be my deserialized.access token. And then here we're going to say token, which is going to be a bearer token, like that. And we also want to add my default request headers again. And we want to say that this one is my application content type application JSON. And then we're going to do a var response equals this. And now on the back end, if I look at my web API, we should see it hit here. Okay, we're going to run the front end. Okay. Looks good. Give it a run this time. Okay, so there's our token. And then not sure what happened here. Unspecified error. Try it again. This might be a problem. What the F? So if I look at this response, I want to do a await my response dot content read a string. Let's check it again to see what's happening. And then on the back end, it's almost like it never started. It's like it never got that far. Test 1, test 2, test 3, test 4, try, catch, debug.log, exception. Let's try it again. We need to start the back end for this to work. Test 1, test 2, and an exception. So the exception here is this. And if I look at my Git, content type, well, I know I can do like a authorization here, like this, and do a new authorization header, which is going to be a bearer, and then my token. Let's try it again. Okay, it says caching is enabled, but no distributed cache is found. So that's on the back end. Here, we need to get rid of this enable caching. We give it another run. And there it is. And we are authed in here. So if I look at my user and my claims, you can see that we have the audience set, the scope set, but we still need to get the unique identifier for them. So let's start on our controllers, okay? So on this, we can delete this controller and this forecast. And the first one that I want to have is for the user. So I'm going to call this a new API controller. And all I want to call this is base controller. Now we need to have some models in here. So I'm going to create a new project in domain. And it's going to be a class library of .NET Core. I'm going to put it in the domain. I'm going to call it phs.gemwars.domain.entities. And so now what I want to do is this first one is going to be called ApplicationUser. And this is going to be a type of base entity. Which is abstract. And on this, I just want to have two fields, a GUID for the ID, and then a date time for my timestamp. And we'll set that equal to UTC now. And then this is going to be a key, and it's going to be a database generated, and then a database generated option identity. An application user is going to inherit from that. Now what we need is a string on here for the ASP.NET user ID. We're also going to have on here a string for the username. And that'll be it for now. Now we're going to make a new folder. called modules. And in this, I'm going to make another new project. And this one I'm going to call phs.gemwars.library. And in this, we need to have a new folder called DTOs. And I'm going to create a new folder here, or a new class called ApplicationUser DTO. And we also need to have this as a base DTO. And on this, it's going to have the GUID for the ID and the date time for my timestamp. And the reason I'm doing this is because I don't want to have circular references. Okay, so now we had a string for the ASP.NET user ID and a string for the username. We also need to have a new project. And we're going to call this a site of modules. phs.gemwars.data_access_layer. And one of the NuGet packages I want to add for this one is AutoMapper. And what I want to do is I want to have this called AutoMap. And I'm going to make this a static. And I want to have a public static iMapper called createMapper. And all you're going to do is return a new mapper configuration. And you're going to say build create mapper like that. And you want to say x.map create map from ApplicationUser to ApplicationUser DTO. And so now in your base controller, I want to get rid of this, and we can make this a abstract class. And the first one here is I want to have a protected asynchronous task of an application user DTO called get application user asynchronous. And what I want to return here is we're going to do a ASP.NET user ID equals my user.claims. And we want to get the first one where my type is equal to sub. Okay. And now, hold on, fixing my cable here. Value. And now we want to get my application user from my. And we want to include now in the data access layer a new class called GemWars Data Access Layer. And in this, we're going to have one function called a public virtual task of ApplicationUser DTO called read ApplicationUser asynchronous. And we want to pass in a string for my ASP.NET user ID. Now, when I instantiate this, I want to have a new I'm going to create a new project in the domain here called phs.gemwars.domain.codefirst. And in this project, I want to have my application DB context, which needs to inherit from DB context. And we're going to bring in these options. And now I want to have a protected DB set called ApplicationUser. Uh, 3.1. Good morning, Painkiller TJ. How are you doing? .1 is the latest, right? Yes, it is. Good morning from Tijuana. Good morning from just north of Los Angeles. I am doing well. Thank you so much. I hope you are as well. So when I look here at my example, this needs to be a public. Okay. So in my data access layer, I'm going to have a constructor which is going to pass in a application DB context. Which is going to have a protected read-only application DB context called context. And now I'm going to extract an interface from this, like that. And so in my base controller, I can pass in my iGemWars data access layer, protected read-only iGemWars data access layer. And what I want to do is I want to await my data access layer and I want to read my user by my ASP.NET user ID. So if my application user is equal to null, now instead of doing this, I want to do a, we're just going to say return null here. Easy enough. And there's a reason for my madness there, because when I'm getting this application user, let's go to my startup now. I want to do a couple of different things where I have a services.add singleton, and it's going to be an I mapper, and we're going to do a automap.create mapper. And then right here I want to say services.add transient my I gem wars data access layer, gem wars data access layer. Do I need to set up a profile for the mapping? I do. I did already here in the automap class, which is a static helper right here. Great call. Okay. So now in this one, we also want to have a iMapper called mapper. Hi. Thank you so much. That works. Appreciate it, baby. Got it. Thank you. Yeah, no problem. My wife just brought me some tea. Awesome. Okay. A protected read-only iMapper called mapper. And all we're going to do is we're going to get my entity equals my context dot application users dot first or default asynchronous, where my ASP.NET equals ASP.NET user ID. And we want to say where it's active. And this needs to be an await. We also need to add another field in here called a bool active, and we want to set that to true. So if my entity does not equal to null, then I want to return a mapper.map to an application user TTL of my entity. Otherwise, I want to return null. Okay. We're going to set up a couple of other tables while I'm starting. The first one is going to be a... What is that? Is a log API. And the second one is a log error. And we want to make this a base entity. And in my log API, I want to have a GUID for my application user ID. And we want to have a application user called application user. And in this, I want to have a enum, which I'm going to add in entities. And I'm going to have this one as a public a new called endpoint type. And all we're going to have here is a application user create and a payload get. Okay, and then also I want to have the response code and the IP address. And since I have a many-to-one relationship here, we need to have a I collection here of log API called log APIs. And now that that's done, just 1 second. I see there's a question. Just give me 1 second and I'll be on it. This is called a log error now. And this is also a base entity. And this one's going to have a GUID for my log API ID and then a log API. And then also I want to have a string for the exception. Come on, microphone. Why do you keep blipping out so bad? Quick question. Do you build separate class library for identity? Does identity have its own connection stream separated from the domain database model? Yes, so a separate class library for identity. Yes, it's a separate ASP.NET web core project, okay? I don't have a separate library for the identity system in this application because I'm doing everything in Identity Server. I'm using the default identity system with ASP.NET, which I'm tying into here. And then also here when I'm starting Identity Server. So I am using a different connection string. So my identity goes to phsgemwars.identity and the other one goes to phs.gemwars. And when identity finishes making and authorizing the user, it attaches a claim with the ASP.NET user ID, which is the unique GUID. And that is the unique identifier that I use to create my user on my web API side. And now when I look at my log API, I want to have one log error potentially. And now what I need to do is quickly pull up here. And yeah, no problem. Very interesting. Loved how you set it up. Am I going to publish this on GitHub? Not the source code for this because this is going to be a production project. I want to look up ASP. We want to say entity framework 121. So a student has an address. So in this case, we're going to just have it like this. This log API has a optional log error, which has one log API. If it has it. Okay. So now what I need to do is in my database context, I need to have a prop db set for my log API called log APIs, and then another one for my log error. And then in my base controller, I want to have the couple of functions. The first one is called protected virtual log API called get log, and we want to pass in the endpoint type and the application user ID, which is a GUID. And in this one, all I'm going to do is return a new log API, which is going to pass in here my application user ID, the endpoint type, the IP address, which is request.http context.connection.remote IP address.toString. Okay, so now that's done, and we want to have another function here for writing the log. And this is very straightforward. Protected virtual asynchronous task of my log API called write log asynchronous. And all we want to have in here is my HTTP status code and the log API. And now I want to say my response code is status code as an integer. And then I want to return my data access layer dot, and then we're going to have a create log API asynchronous of my log. Just 1 second, please. Sorry about that. All right. I want to try learning this architecture. Do you have a skeleton on GitHub? I want to identify the identity on its own separate class and have the identity streams on global class like you did. Sure, check these out. These are all the videos for many projects, and I've implemented many of these identity servers. Additionally, there's this GitHub, and I have a boilerplate up there for the Angular CLI project plus the identity server for, I need to update it though. And then additionally, for another resource, you can always reach this great community that we've put together at discord.pixelhorrorstudios.com. Thanks, Painkiller TJ. Appreciate it. So now in here, I want to have a task of a log API called create log API asynchronous. And then another one for the log error called create log error asynchronous. We also want to have one more, and we're going to change this to be like this, because in my function I want to have one more called a task of a bool called commit asynchronous. So this is going to be log equals create log API. And then you want to do await data access layer dot commit asynchronous and then return your log. The last one you want to have is this protected virtual void asynchronous task of my log error called write log error asynchronous. And that's just going to be the exception and the log API. Yeah, no problem. And here we're going to make a new log error. And in this, I want to say that we're going to have the exception is the exception.message. The log API ID is going to be log API dot ID. And then I want to do the timestamp equals log API dot timestamp, so they're correlated. That's it. And now we're going to do a log equals data access layer dot create log error of my log API. And then I want to return the log. Now this is just slightly incorrect because it needs to be like that. And we need to do a await data access layer dot commit asynchronous. Okay. So now that we've created our logs, we've instantiated everything here for our dependency injection. We have our new, let's create our first endpoint here. Okay, and so for this endpoint, we're going to create a new controller here. And I'm going to call this payload. Hey, Dead Lion, it has been a very long time. Things are going great. My wife and I moved. We're expecting. Life is phenomenal, man. How are you? It's great to hear from you. Have you checked out any of the projects which are out there or the demo of the game that I'm creating, Gem Wars? It's up at pixelhorrorstudios.com. You can play it for free. Any feedback I'm getting, I'm implementing in the game. We're going to call this a payload controller. And I want this just to be at the controller. And I want it to be an API controller, and I want it to be authorized. And we're going to make this a base controller. And then we're going to create the constructor for it. Awesome, man. Thanks for coming back. It's been some time. How are things with you? The last time we spoke, I think you were having skunk problems. Okay, so now I want to have a public asynchronous task of an iAction result here. And I want it to be a get payload asynchronous. And we'll do this as an HTTP get. And all I want to do here is get my player like that. And if my player is equal to null, then I want to await my, I'm just going to do a return a not found. Otherwise, you want to await write my log API of my OK. And up here, we're going to make a log here, get log, and it's going to be for an endpoint type of my payload get. And this is going to be player.id. That was like 3 years ago. Yeah, I do remember that. I know who you are, buddy. And then if that's all done, then we're going to return a OK of my application user. Otherwise, we'll do this in a try catch. And I'm going to add my exception here. And here we're going to do a await write log asynchronous. And it's going to be a internal server error. And then you want to do a write log error, which is going to be this exception and this log. And then we're going to return a status code, an HTTP status code dot internal server error as an integer. Otherwise, we're going to do a write log API of a bad request. And that's never going to hit. Okay. So let's go ahead and set my API as my startup project. And now we're going to go to the code first project here and do a add migration called init. Now we probably need to add a couple of functions. So here we'll add these in. So in my create log, we're just going to do a return a context.log apis.add my log. And this one's going to be the same thing. And this one's just going to be a context.save changes asynchronous is greater than 0. Now we should be able to build it. Hey, Crystallizes, welcome back. It's good to have you with us. Okay, we need to do on this project install package Microsoft.entity framework core.design. So let me look at my packages in the solution here. If I look at consolidate, entity framework core here. Yeah, so let's select everything and just update everything. Okay, now we'll try it again. That's happening here. So if I look at this, can I do a protected override on configuring or something? Which is called a what? Configuration options or something. Let me see what that is. Just a second here. Called DB context options builder, called options builder. Okay. And all I want to do is options builder.use SQL server of my but I don't want to inject that, do I? Maybe I can. I think I can do a iGlobals, call this globals, have a protected read-only iGlobals called globals. This comes from install package Microsoft.entity framework core.SQL server. Now I can do a globals.connection string. Let's try it again. So we're going to look for this real quick. And we're going to say startup doesn't reference this .NET Core. So I think it's because up here, we're going to also add the design project. There we go. No. Also put it on this one. See, this isn't referencing this project. So let's add a project reference here to the code first project. Let me unload this and reload it. Try it again. Oops, 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 oops. That'll fail, don't worry. Code first. What the hell is happening here? Because it doesn't know what this globals is. Okay, so over in here, just 1 second. This should do it. Try build, clean solution. Try running this command again. No. So we're also going to add a install package Microsoft.entity framework core.tools, and then design, and then SQL Server. And then we're going to do the same thing on the Web API project. SQL Server, design, and tools. We'll select back this and do another add migration. There we go. Now I can do an update database. Okay, we're going to check this on my SQL Server. It says it's finished. Here it is. Here's Gem Wars with my 3 tables. I should have a constraint. Foreign key. Looks good. Okay. So now I'm going to run it. And when I do this, we're going to look at my payload controller. And on my front end, we're going to change this to go to payload. And just see what happens here. And there it is. So when I look at this, it's going to try to get my ASP.NET user ID, which it does, and it's going to try to return that user, and it's going to fail. And then this is going to return a 404 for not found. I don't want to return that. I want to return a code which is forbidden, which is 403, which is good. Good. So that's going to be a 403. So in the code, I want to get my response dot status code. We're going to say debug.log here forbidden. Okay. We'll give this a run, and also on the back end. there's the code, and we received that it's forbidden. So what I want to do is I want to make a new controller here. I'm going to call it a player controller. And this is going to be a base controller. And in this, we're going to have a new post. So this is going to be a HTTP post, and this is going to be a post player create asynchronous. And in this, we're going to have a new request. Which is going to be a base request. Oops, and then I'm going to have a new class here called ApplicationUser create request. And all this is going to have on it is a string for the username. And in the auto mapper, we want to go from a application user create request to a application user. And so in here we want to have a create application user with a application user create request. Okay, this one is a endpoint type application user create. We're going to say that this is a post application user create asynchronous. Okay, and now I'm going to call this a application users controller. And this is going to be a it's going to be a little bit different here. The reason I'm doing this is so you can select your username. So here we're going to do a application user create request. And I want to get a application user equals await my data access layer dot create application user asynchronous, right? We're going to pass in the request. So if my application user does not equal to null, then we're going to do this. One thing I want to do before I forget is in the code first application model, I want to have a in my on model creating, I want to do my base, and I want to say a builder dot application users entity application user index, which is called ASP.NET user ID, and then we have a unique true. Yeah, I have a bug that I have to fix. Oh, I've got a couple of bugs I need to fix for you. Interesting. Yeah, I have a new version which I need to push out. I can do that before the end of the stream, actually. And that should resolve a lot of the problems that are currently up there. But I'm glad that you're playing it. Do you have any feature requests or anything like that? I'm going to add player versus player is what I'm getting started adding. Okay. So if my application user does not equal to null, then we're going to create it. And then do a we're going to write it. And then I want to do a, if I look at this, we're going to say await data access layer.commit asynchronous. And then we're going to return the application user. Otherwise, we want to return nothing like that. Here I want to do a return forbidden of my application user of nothing. Okay. So we're going to add a quick migration. Hey, Fallen Hope, welcome back. It's good to have you with us. No requests at the moment. It's enjoyable, he says. That's great. I think the multiplayer will make it a lot of fun. Also on my payload controller, we get the log. We do an await data access layer dot commit asynchronous. This one is the same thing. Okay, this one is a create application user asynchronous. Pretty straightforward here. We say for entity equals mapper.map to my application user, a type of request. I also want this to have a string for the ASP.NET user ID. And then we're going to say entity.userID equals ASP.NET user ID. And then we do a context.applicationusers.add my entity. And then if my it hasn't created it yet, so now it's just going to return my entity. Because I'm doing these separate, so like this, it's not asynchronous. Because we have the separate commit for transactions. How are you doing, A Fallen Hope? Welcome to the channel today. It's good to have you with us. Create application user. And this one is going to be your user.claims.first or default, where my type is equal to sub. Dot value. So now on our front end, we're going to try to get the payload. And now since this one was forbidden, I'm going to do a client dot using a new client, client new equals new, and we'll clean this up in a little bit. And now I'm going to do a client new dot post asynchronous to the application users endpoint, and I'm going to pass across the HTTP content. And we're going to do this with this new JSON request. I'm just going to add this down here as a public class called JSON content, which is a type of string content. And all I want this to have is the constructor. Which is going to be JSON utility dot serial to JSON of my object, which is called like that. And then encoding.utf8, and then we're going to say that this is application JSON. And so now you can do a new JSON content, and we're going to create a new application user create request, which is going to be a application user create request. And all I want to pass in here is the username. Okay, and now I want to say if my response new not status code equals okay does not equal okay, then I want to return. Otherwise, I want to get this one more time. Okay, and now on the back end, we're going to add a one there, and one there. Okay, let's run it. Okay, we got the token. We're going to try to get the payload. It should be forbidden. It is. It should be posting to this one. So this is failing. Let me look at this again, and we want to do a HTTP client post to async example.NET Core. String content, JSON in string. I mean, this is just about the same thing. So in here, I wonder if I can find a package called Newtonsoft. Or JSON.NET. Okay, so we're going to go to the asset store. And I want to look for Newtonsoft. So we'll import this project. And so now I should be able to do this as a JSON convert. Dot serialize object. That should work now. So when we try it again, come on. And we run this again. This time we get the payload, it's going to fail. It never posted still. Okay, so back here in Gem Wars, application users, application users. Let's do a try catch here. Try it again. And that's because I don't want to do this with a coroutine. I want this to run on a separate thread in the background. Interesting. Still nothing yet. Over here, let's go ahead and add Swagger. I'm just adding this so I can test it. And then we don't need these. And then we also want to have this add Swagger. And we're not injecting a style sheet. And we're going to say that this is called Gem Wars WebAPI v1. So if I was to look at this and try it out, it should give me an unauthorized, and it does. So I can steal this token. Add this in. Okay, that one worked. It created it. It's probably going to fail. Okay. It's just passing this username test. So in the app, the endpoint is ApplicationUser's post. So up here, we're going to try attaching this to Unity again. No, same error. Where is that? I'm looking for an example of this. So we could try this. New string content of my dynamic type, which I'm just going to call that. Trying to remember how to do this. Like that. And we want to do that for the encoding.utf8 and then the application/JSON. I bet it's that which is making it fail. So here, I'm going to say that this is called content. And we can do a debug.log of my content. Oh, I know exactly why this is failing. I never... I never... set the access token. Try it again. There's the payload. So we're going to make another function here called a protected virtual asynchronous task called create application user. Like that. And then we're going to read it, and then I'm going to pass it across. Let's try that again. Okay, it did the get. So it looks like it's failing on this post. It's like it's never serializing this data. So if I did a var test equals JSON utility, JSON convert dot serialize object of a new, and I want to say username equals Bob. And then I did a debug.log of the test. It looks like it's never serializing. So if I change that to be JSON utility dot to JSON, and I try it again, it's like it's never executing create application user, because it's not. Because I already created it. So what I need to do is jump into here. We're going to delete my databases. And then we're going to go to the back end. And I'm going to go through my contexts. And then we're going to select the identity context. And I'm going to do a update database /c application database context. persisted grant database context. And configuration database context. So now we're going to start everything up. Give it a run. Okay, we got the payload. It's going to give me a forbidden result. And that time it successfully posted to the API. So if I look back at this, I can now move my JSON content here. And then I can get rid of my test and my read. And then up here, I can say, if this is true, then we're going to get my payload. Okay, I'm going to run this again. We're going to create a user this time. There's the access token. We get a forbid result. We post it. We get my application user. Thought it would have hit that one more time. Like that. But now when I get this again, I should have my user. There it is. And we write that we received the payload. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new class in here called HTTP. And in this, I'm going to move my DTOs in here, my requests in here. And then we're also going to have a HTTP manager. And in this, I want to add my JSON content in here. And we can make this disposable. And so now, when I get my access token, I want to have a public virtual asynchronous task of a token DTO called get access token asynchronous. And in this, you want to have a private const called, hey, Nicola B131. How are you doing? Welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for that support. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to put them into the chat. And I want this to be my identity server URL is http://localhost 5000. And my private const string called WebAPI URL equals https://localhost 44372. And now this is going to be your identity server URL /connect, like that. And then we also want to have another one here, which is a public virtual asynchronous task of a application user DTO, which we haven't created yet. And this is going to be called create application user asynchronous, and it's going to pass in an application user create request. And up here we'll make a application user DTO, which only has a username and the ID. I want to say if my response.status code is equal to forbidden, I want to return null. Otherwise, we're going to deserialize it. And then down here, same thing. Except we want to use the simple using again. Hold on. If you didn't get the application user, you still have a token. So it's actually a public virtual asynchronous task called a get payload asynchronous, which is this. And up here we can have a protected token DTO called token. And now you want to have a protected virtual bool called is token valid. If my token is equal to null, return false. You're going to set the authorization header here to be your token dot access token. Well, if your is token valid, and we can do this as an asynchronous task of a bool. Then I want to say await get access token. If my token is equal to null, then I want to return false. And on this DTO, or token dot is expired. Okay. Okay. If your is token valid asynchronous, then you want to create a new one, and then you're going to send it to your WebAPI URL. And if your status code is forbidden, then you want to create your application user. Then you're going to return false. Oh, hold on. So we're going to say because the payload that you get is just going to be your application user right now. So this is user needs to be created. So we'll do this with an event. And now I want to do a response.content.read as string asynchronous. I want to do a JSON convert.deserialize object into a type of ApplicationUser DTO. And then you're going to return true. So here, if my is token valid asynchronous, then you're going to use my client here, set the authorization to be token.access token. We're going to post to the WebAPI URL. And if my response code is created, return new, it's just a status code.http status code.created, like this. Then we want to do this, where we're going to return the deserialization of my response. Read as, otherwise you want to return a null. Okay, so you have now your get payload, get access token. Might be easier to make this static. We'll worry about that later. But now, when I do my get access token here in my title manager, I can have a global manager have a protected HTTP manager called HTTP manager. We're going to go ahead and make this a static class. So now when you're in Title Manager, I want to do a await HTTP manager dot get access token. And then I want to say, if my HTTP manager dot is token valid asynchronous, because that should get the token if you don't already have it. Then you want to do a await get payload asynchronous. Okay, and so now when I run this, what? Let's do a clean one failed, right here, is expired. Let me look at my manager for HTTP manager, and I should have a right here. I want to say if my access token is not null or white space, and my timestamp plus my time span from seconds of my expires in is less than or equal to my date time.utc now. So if the token is null, or the time of this plus the expires in is less than this. Wait a minute. If the access token is not there, so that means that it's not, we're going to say that this is valid token. Or if the timestamp plus the seconds is greater than. Then I want to return false, otherwise I want to return true. And I just want to say debug.log not valid token debug.log valid token. Okay, let's try it again. Did that not build? It says it did. So what it doesn't like is these usings like this. Okay, let's check the back end. It's running. We can get rid of this and this one. And we can give this a run now. Okay, we got the payload. And it says not a valid token, just one time. Looks like you should just be able to do it once here. No, you can't do that. If your token is equal to null here. Yeah. One more try. Okay, that got the token. And we returned the payload. Okay. I gotta take a short break. When I come back, what we're gonna do is we're gonna add in the rest of the objects that we've created in the game. So what those look like we have is, they're here under scriptable objects. We have the blocks. We have block gems, we have boards, color chances, draw pieces, gem chances, gems, pieces, rewards, and rounds. And all of that needs to be logged on our web API. So we're going to be continuing that when we get back. Thanks for staying with me. If you haven't, make sure you check out our videos at YouTube, youtube.pixelhorrorstudios.com. And I put all these videos up at, those are all up at youtube.pixelhorrorstudios.com. And also check out our Discord at discord.pixelhorrorstudios.com. See you in 15 minutes.